all need to make smart decisions with our money. The Long-Term Investor podcast shows you how by distilling complex financial matters into easily digestible lessons. And now, here's your host, Chief Investment Officer at PlanCorp and the author of Making Money Simple, Peter Lazaroff.
Welcome to The Long-Term Investor. Today I have an extra special guest for you, Nick Maggiulli, creator of the popular blog of Dollars and Data and author of the book Just Keep Buying. He joins me today to discuss his new book, The Wealth Ladder, which is just a really innovative framework for personal finance decisions. We explore some of the unique concepts of the financial levels that he talks about in the book. We also go through two of the very actionable rules for wealth management and some data-driven insights on earning, spending, and happiness. Now, before we get to the conversation, so much of those two actionable rules that I mentioned have to do with your net worth. So if you open up the episode description in your podcast app, you can download my net worth worksheet and be able to apply so much of this conversation directly to your situation. So be sure to check that out while you're listening to our conversation, which I won't hold back from you any longer. Here is my conversation with Nick Maggiulli. Welcome to The Long-Term Investor. Today with me, I'm thrilled to have Nick Maggiulli, author of the wonderful blog of Dollars and Data, and here today to talk about his new book, The Wealth Ladder. Incredible stuff, Nick. Thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me on again, Peter. Appreciate it.
Let's start high level. I'm going to dive into the details, but just tell us high level how you came up with the concept, because you write a lot about data. You had another book earlier called Just Keep Buying. And I got to say, I was impressed that you had a second coming out. Really fantastic stuff. Just give us some of the inspiration.
So there was this Jay-Z lyric. Actually, no, it starts before that. So I think his name's Stuart Butterfield, the guy who founded Slack, had this idea called like the 3 levels of wealth. And it was like, you can buy what you want at a grocery store, you can buy what you want at a restaurant. And I can't even remember the third level. I can't even remember it honestly anymore. But he had that idea. At the same time, Jay-Z had this lyric where I'm not going to say the full lyric because he curses, but he just says like, what's 50 grand to someone like me? Can you please remind me? At the time, his net worth was 500 million. So I was like, oh, that's like 0.01% of his net worth. That's like a trivial amount of money. There's these levels. I'm like, what if we could like come up with like a levels of wealth that actually kind of go across different like logarithms, like 10x jumps. And I think that was the idea behind the wealth ladder and having these 6 distinct levels. And I then realized, you know what, that this could apply outside of just spending. It can apply to income. It can apply to investments, et cetera. And the whole idea behind it is like, what financial strategy you follow will vary over time. And as you build wealth, you may want to change your strategy. You may have to use a different strategy depending on where you want to go. And that's kind of the big insight. Like, as I say in the introduction, like, just like a fitness coach would give different advice to a morbidly obese person versus like a well-trained athlete, I think we need to apply that same thinking to the financial world. And that's kind of the point of the wealth ladder, which is like, hey, once I know your net worth, or kind of like your net worth range, which is which wealth level you're in, then I can kind of give you more advice on what you could be considering to do next.
And as somebody who creates content themselves, that seems like a really daunting task. And you're right, so much of the content out there is directed at the masses, but it really only applies to a specific group of people. And here you've kind of created a new lens through which people can think about personal finance decisions. I want to start with something that I just have a feeling is going to be in personal finance content for the next decade or two, and that's the 0.1% rule. Tell us what that is, because I really think anyone who writes a personal finance book is going to be referencing Nick Maggiulli's rule from here out.
So the 0.01% rule, or you could think of it as the 1/10,000th rule, is just you take your net worth, you multiply by 0.01%, which is actually 0.0001, right? It's 1 basis point, or you could divide by 10,000 as well, the same thing. So take your net worth, divide by 10,000. That gives you an amount of money. And once again, that amount of money is what I consider a trivial amount to you. So whatever your net worth is, it applies to anybody. So for Jay-Z, if he used the 0.01% rule, at the time when he wrote that lyric, it would have been $50,000, right? For someone with $1 million, the 0.01% rule is $100, right? So it's a very small, that's 1/10,000th of your net worth. And the idea behind this is the amount of money you can spend without thinking about it. And the logic behind it is that your wealth is generating 0.01% per day. So if you do that over the course of a year, 1.01%, you do that 365 days in a row, that's 3.7% a year, relatively conservative return. I don't think anyone's going to be like, that's too crazy, Nick. So I say conservatively, your wealth should be able to return about 3.7% on average every year. If that's true, it's throwing off this amount of money. You could consume that and still have the same wealth over time, all else equal. Of course, your income matters and how you spend money and everything, but I'm just trying to help people with that marginal decision. Like, oh, do I buy the nicer eggs? Do I buy the nicer entree at a restaurant? Can I upgrade my seat on an airplane? Like, these are all the questions, and that amount of that decision should be dependent on your net worth, and that's where it comes from. And so I have these 6 wealth levels, and we can get into the levels.
Yeah, I should have let you lead with that. Why don't you walk us through the 6 wealth levels?
So once again, this is net worth. That's all your assets minus all your liabilities. So everything you own, such as your car, your home, your stocks, include home equity, include all that stuff on the asset side. Subtract out all your liabilities. So your mortgage, student loans, credit card debt, etc. You're going to have a number. Hopefully it's a positive number. Hopefully it's a large positive number, right? And once you have that number, it's going to put you on somewhere on the wealth ladder. Level 1 is less than $10,000 in net worth. Level 2 is $10,000 to $100,000 in net worth. Level 3 is $100,000 to $1 million in net worth. Level 4 is $1 to $10 million in net worth. Level 5 is $10 million to $100 million in net worth. And level 6 is over $100 million. And the idea is, if you just memorize one of the levels, I say just memorize level 3, that's $100,000 to $1 million. You can figure out all the rest by multiplying or dividing by 10. So if you remember, level 3 is $100,000 to $1 million, which is, by the way, in the data, that looks like that's like the middle class in the United States. About 40% of US households are in that level. So $100,000 to $1 million total net worth. 20% are in level 1, 20% are in level 2, around 18% are in level 4, that's 1 to 10 million. And then the last 2%, that's the wide tail. That's like level 5, 10 to 100. And then there's like 10,000 households that have over $100 million in net worth. It's a very, very rare place to get to. So once you have that, that's just the idea for the levels. And then on terms of the spending with the 0.01% rule, I say, hey, if you're in level 2, that's grocery freedom. You can start to spend more at the grocery store. By the time you get to the end of level 2, you don't have to worry about what you buy at the grocery store, right? By the time you're at level 3, which is 100,000, the beginning of level 3, by the end of level 3, you have restaurant freedom. So level 2 is grocery freedom. Level 3 is restaurant freedom. Level 4 is what I call travel freedom, etc. And you can kind of go from there. And so the idea here is like, I wanted a rule because I think lifestyle creep in the personal finance space is very hated upon or disliked. Like, oh, don't spend any more money. You can't let your lifestyle creep at all. My argument is you should let your lifestyle creep, but only after you've built wealth. And I think this system allows you to spend more over time after you've demonstrated the financial discipline. You're like, hey, look, I made it to level 3. I can now start to buy more at a restaurant without worrying about it. Or, hey, I made it to level 4. I can start to upgrade my seat or stay at a nicer hotel. Like, I think that's a way of allowing lifestyle creep. So you kind of allow your spending to go up, but it's much slower. And I don't know, the levels just make sense to me.
They made sense to me when I read it. And you also visually within the book show it so simply and so cleanly. I think for those of you watching us or listening to us, when you have this book in your hands, or if you read it on Kindle, I'll admit I actually read it electronically, despite the fact that I'm holding the physical copy in my hands. What you'll start to do is you'll see where you slot. And I think one of the things, Nick, that I experience in my professional life as an advisor is people want to know, like, well, how am I doing versus people like me? And so I think people are going to really enjoy saying, well, am I in level 3 or level 4 and level 5? And this first rule that you introduced, you're right, it does allow some lifestyle creep and you can relate to it. I sit there and I think, yeah, I do order whatever it is I want at the restaurant. And I do travel a lot, but I don't go to the Ritz every stay. You know, I think the key, and maybe I'm going to explain how I read it. Maybe you can put your own spin on it. But basically, it's not saying you can just take whatever vacation you want when you have travel freedom. The idea is that the choice between one hotel room and another, or one tour guide or not having a tour guide, you know, when those things are trivial, then you can spend more confidently. And honestly, money's a tool to live a fulfilling life. Why not spend more confidently on these different things? I will tell you though, Nick, I can't get over a lot of stuff at the grocery store. I still cheap out, but maybe I'll get cage-free eggs next time. Am I interpreting that the way that you were thinking as you laid it out?
That's exactly correct, right? So when I'm thinking about it, it's like, yeah, it's that marginal decision. And really, you have the full freedom by the end of the level. And even within that, there's always context. Like when I say travel freedom, like, I mean, like you can basically upgrade to first class anytime. You can basically stay at any hotel by the time you have $10 million in net worth. Can you fly private? Maybe once a year, but like regularly, no, it's just too expensive. Even when you have restaurant freedom, you can't be buying $1,000 bottles of wine, right? So there's always exceptions, but in general, like that spending category becomes open. You can travel when you want to go somewhere and where. You can go basically anywhere in the world if you have 10 million bucks. I don't think there's any place you couldn't go. Could you go private? Probably not, right? Could you do certain other things? Probably not. But for the most part, you're going to have that freedom. And so that's kind of the thinking. It's not trying to be perfect. It's just trying to get people to think about this differently. And you brought up a good point. Like, not everyone's going to feel the same that these categories work with them as well. For you, you're like, no, I still cheap out of the grocery store. I don't care. It's not about the money. There's got to be a behavioral thing or a reason or a quality thing. Every person has different feelings about things. You're like, you feel like you're getting ripped off and you're not going to spend that. That's for you. That's on for you to figure out.
Well, and it's important to note that you mentioned this is liquid net worth. So typically when you're thinking about this rule, for those of you listening, for those of you watching, you might want to back your house out of your liquid net worth. And maybe if you're still in your prime working years, you might even back out your retirement accounts. I guess that's a little bit of a toss up. How do you think about that? And then also, let me kind of tack on something. How would you think about this rule specifically for retirees? Because their liquid net worth is their retirement accounts and their bank accounts at that point. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah. So in general, when I say your wealth level, I say use your total net worth. And that's what I've used throughout the book. But you're right. When we're talking about spending, you do got to kind of think about liquid net worth because you can't eat your home equity in the traditional sense. Yes, you can get a HELOC. There's a lot of stuff you can do to get access to it, but it's not the same as having that liquid. And so you're right. You're like, oh, I have $1.1 million. But if $500,000 of that's in a retirement account and 400,000 is in home equity, you're not going to feel like you have that much travel freedom, with whatever, $200,000, right? So I do think that matters as well. And I kind of get into the nuances there, but you're right. And then for retirees, like it really depends on your situation. That's where I think income matters more because for someone who's working, okay, I have income, I'm spending some amount, and then how much is my wealth throwing off is a second question. But I guess I would include all the retirement assets in liquid net worth because it is still generating income. They are using that. So I think it is liquid by the time you reach retirement. But before then, you might want to discount it a little bit.
Well, I wrote down a quote when I was reading the book. It says, having wealth signals financial discipline. And I'll tell you, a lot of retirees who have a substantial amount of wealth, it is very difficult to get them to spend their money. And I promise you, the 0.1% rule is going to become a natural part of conversation. Let me shift a little bit, though, to talk about the 1% rule, because your writing in general, and certainly in this book, throughout your career, you've made a pretty strong case that people should be focusing on earning more than just saving or budgeting. So why do you think that message is underrepresented in personal finance? And then maybe you can transition and talk a little bit about the 1% rule, not to be confused with the 0.1% rule.
Yeah, I think people have kind of demonized spending a lot because it's an easy target and also because we probably all know someone that spends too much. I think it's very easy to think of like, oh, an anecdote. Oh, yeah, I know that person. They spend crazy. Like that's why they're not wealthy, right? When if you actually look at the data, like overwhelmingly, it's the people that have higher incomes that are able to save more, that are able to invest more, earn more, etc. And that creates a flywheel that builds wealth. So if you look at the data, as I show in the wealth letter, I talked about it a little bit in Just Keep Buying, but I dug even deeper and got even more data on this. And like, it's the strongest relationship in personal finance. Income and savings rate are so highly linked, it's crazy. Like in general, the higher someone's income, the more they're able to save. Of course, you're going to know someone that's like, well, that guy makes double what I make and they don't save anything. Well, yeah, I can name people like that too, but overwhelmingly higher income earners save more than lower income earners. And it's not because they're amazing budgeters. It's just because they have more at the end of the month. It's a lot easier to save money when you don't have to think about it, right? If I just think about it now, let's say you're budgeting, you have whatever your budget, and I just add an extra 100K to your budget right now, a year. That's if all else equal, you would just save all of that, right? Like it's not gonna be like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm now gonna spend all 100K. No, you'll probably spend some of it, which is natural, but you're not gonna spend all of it. You're probably gonna find it difficult even to spend all of that unless you know like, oh, I already know what I would spend it on, right? So it's a lot of the personality decisions and things that go into that. In terms of the 1% rule, though, like the 0.01% rule is great for spending because it's like a daily measure. in terms of the 1% rule, I just wanted to say, hey, 0.01% wasn't enough on the income side. It's enough on spending, but on income, like when you're evaluating an income opportunity, I say, if it's not going to move your net worth by 1% over some time span, then you probably shouldn't even waste your time on it. And it doesn't have to be exactly 1%. It could be a little bit less, a little bit more, whatever. But there's millionaires out there that drive across town to save like 2 cents on gas. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, don't get me wrong. You are saving money, but like relative to other things you could be doing, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think those are examples of like, if you use the 1% rule, you can basically say like, okay, if my net worth is $1 million, the question is this opportunity going to eventually produce $10,000 for me? If the answer is no, I probably shouldn't even get started on or anything close to that. Obviously, the amount of time matters. You know, if I said, hey, clap your hands, I'll pay you $100, everyone would do it, right? But my point is, in the real world with realistic income opportunities, you need to look, oh, is this raise worth it? Is this career opportunity worth it? Is this new client worth it, right? You're going to be evaluating things like this and like, wow, if this is not going to even move my net worth by 1%, why am I spending so much time, effort, energy, stress, etc. on such an endeavor? And so I just wanted to come up with something that allows people to reevaluate their income decisions a little bit.
Yeah, that totally resonated with me when I was reading it. I know I signed a consulting contract for a physicians group a while back, and it took a lot of work. And I remember being like, well, is this amount of money? It seemed like a lot of money. And at the time, I was kind of okay with the extra work. I think having this rule of thumb for knowing whatever your extra side hustle is or whatever you say yes to, because as you become more successful, a lot of what made you successful was saying yes. You need to learn to say no. The 1% rule gives you a really nice framework to do that. And I also, just a few weeks ago, remember meeting with a spinal surgeon who has young kids, and he's doing some consulting work on the side. And they were asking if the income was really worth it. And they had a specific use case for those dollars. I hadn't read your book yet at that point in time. Again, I think you've touched on a lot of things that it's going to resonate with a lot of people. I've already mentioned the data. I'm just going to read off some of the things that I found really interesting. So when you're reading the book, you'll see some percentages of wealth that different things make up. So if we're looking at levels 1 through 6, like what percentage of the net worth is cash? What percent is cars? What percent is homes, retirement accounts, business interests, real estate? And I think those of you watching us, listening to us, wouldn't be terribly surprised by some of them. But when you see them, the hard data, it's pretty impressive. So let me ask you this, Nick. I mean, what are the things you learned about the financial makeup of the different levels that surprised you? And what were some things that did not surprise you?
So I kind of knew this a little bit in some other data I had seen, but I never had it broken out by wealth level. But it's just how much of the financial assets in those in level 2 and level 3 have in their primary residence. And like it is the vast majority of their assets, right? So I knew that kind of intrinsically, but when I saw it, it's just a little bit more jarring. Like, wow, these people have, 50, 60, 70%. Remember, this is on average across the entire wealth level. This is not just like one person. Like there are some people that have 90% of their assets in their home, right? And so it's not shocking necessarily, but it was more extreme than I thought. Things that didn't surprise me, obviously, people higher on the wealth ladder own more stocks, bonds. I knew that type of stuff. They're going to have more in their retirement accounts. They're going to own more real estate. I also knew that people higher on the wealth ladder generally own more businesses, like business interests. So they have their own businesses, or maybe they're in a startup and they have a lot of equity in a business, etc. So I knew that as well. I think the other thing that kind of shocked me, though, is I basically said, okay, cash, that's not income producing. A vehicle, that's not income producing. Your primary home's not income producing. Everything else on this list that you listed, stocks, bonds, retirement, real estate, your own business, that's all income producing. So I just put a binary on all these and then I summed them up by wealth level. And I was surprised at how linear it was in the sense of as you move up the wealth ladder, every level had more income producing assets than the one below. And it went all the way up to level 6. Like every single one, it's just more and more income producing assets. And it's funny because I quote my first book, Just Keep Buying. And the mantra there is like the continual purchase of a diverse set of income producing assets. And I was like, I kind of knew this was directionally correct. And now that I have this other data set and I'm like breaking it out, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is so obvious. And I think the main punchline for those like looking through chapter 3, which is the investment chapter you reference, less than 25% of the assets of those in levels 1 to 3 is in income producing assets, right? So if you're in levels 1 to 3, on average, less than 25% of their assets are going to be in some sort of income producing asset. But in levels 4 to 6, it's over 50%. So it's a night and day difference across the wealth ladder. And seeing that makes you realize, oh, wow, they put a lot of their money into things that give them more money. And it becomes a flywheel. Like your money starts creating money, and it's very easy to have more wealth, and that creates more wealth. And it's just your income goes up with it. And it's one of those things where people know this, they've heard these ideas before, but to see it so clearly in the data is the thing that I think is going to be valuable for a lot of people.
That advantage compounding, and you go back to some of your lessons of compounding at one point in the book, people always understand or will tell you, yes, I understand compounding, but until you look at the data or see the extreme examples, you really can't always appreciate it. And I feel like it shows you why it's so hard to set policy that helps everybody, because everybody's in such a different situation. And yes, you're right, like levels 1 and 2, not having any income producing assets really puts them at a relative disadvantage to the other levels in our country. I'm sure if you looked at the whole world data, our country would actually look quite good, though. I mean, we always forget that we do just generally have it pretty good here. You know, one of the other things that stood out to me is that as you start looking at the different levels, you also kind of get a sense about what it is that helps people move up and down levels. Do you mind sharing some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in general, the one takeaway across the levels is like you need to raise your income. And of course, that's easier said than done. I wish I had a magic wand and we all could just raise our income. Usually it's a multi-year journey. It takes a ton of work. Like there's no easy way to do it, unfortunately. But if you look at the data, it's very correlated. And seeing that, like, okay, hey, what's the difference between those people who stay in level 2 over time versus those that make it to level 3, let's say over a decade? And the same thing with like those going from level 3 to level 4 versus those that stay in level 3. The big difference is their starting income. What is their income at the beginning of the period? You could have two different groups of people within level 2. Those with the higher income are more likely to end up at level 3. The same thing was going from level 3 to level 4, right? The higher income person's more likely to end up in level 4. And I followed, the same set of households. I actually got my hands on a data set from the University of Michigan, which follows the same households over time. And we can actually see that. A lot of the data we look at is snapshots. So I'm seeing how American wealth as a whole is changing, but I'm not seeing how individual household wealth is changing. And so by keeping the same households over time and following them, you can see, oh, wow, like that's the difference. Or, oh, that's interesting. The households that stayed in level 3, they spent almost as much as the households that made to level 4, but their income wasn't as high. So there is a keeping up with the Joneses in the data. I know we talk about it, but I can actually see it in the data a little bit. And so it's not a massive data set. It doesn't have every household out there, but they do some good sampling techniques and you can start to get to that stuff. So in terms of ways people move up, it's usually education, getting a better job. That's how you raise your income. That's one way. Getting skills, being good at sales, for example. Like some of the most high paid individuals in the United States are salespeople, and you don't necessarily need a degree for that. A lot of these people, it's like, what can you sell? If you can sell, I don't imagine, people talk about AI now. I know people talk about this a lot, but I can't imagine a robot realtor. I just can't imagine it. I think you're not going to walk into a house and have a robot there showing you, oh, here's the foyer. It's just not going to happen, right? So if you get good at sales, you can raise your income, right? And you just start selling higher priced things, luxury products, etc. And there's more to it. Like the book dives into a lot of these things, but it's just thinking about like, okay, I want to move up the wealth ladder. Like it really depends where you start. So level 2, I say, is education. Level 3, that's where I start focusing on investing, income producing assets. And by the time you get to level 4, how do you move up from there? That's where you have to kind of really switch up your strategy. And basically you have to become a business owner. And we can definitely get into that if you're interested.
Well, there's a line I loved. I mean, I think it's the subtitle of a chapter, but you said, what got you here won't get you there. I absolutely love that. And I'll give the Cliff Note version of just saying like, yeah, start a business, be an entrepreneur, take some risks. That's where the atypical wealth comes from. Part of the reason I jump a little bit over that is that I felt like it was nice that you incorporated stuff on spending. And you mentioned that spending money well can be just as hard as earning or investing it. So could you share some practical examples of what good spending decisions might look like near the top of the ladder, the top half of the ladder, let's say, or your ideal clients, my ideal clients at Ritholtz Wealth and Plancorp?
Yeah, because at that point, the spending issues are going to be all the big ticket items. It's going to be your house. It's going to be any sort of large expenses are the things that are eating at your wealth. It's not going to be like, oh, I went and spent extra at the grocery store this week, or I went and spent extra at a restaurant one time. It's the ongoing burn that is usually the issue. As I said, the difference between those households that stayed in level 3 versus those that went from level 3 to level 4, let's say in a decade, besides income, which is a big piece of it, is spending. Like the people that stay in level 3 spend almost as much as those that make it to level 4. But they don't make as much. So they are keeping up. And that's why I say level 3 is middle class, level 4 is upper middle class. Obviously depends on where you live. But when you start defining things in that way, you can start to understand how these two levels have very similar lifestyles in a lot of ways. They're on the same plane. They're probably shopping at similar stores. Maybe the level 4 has a slightly nicer car. Maybe they live in a slightly nicer house in a slightly nicer neighborhood, but it's not like they're in like a completely different part. They're on the same airplane, as I said, right? They're not flying private, right? So when you start going through all this, you realize, oh yeah, that's the difference between the middle class and the upper middle class, but it really does fit the data. You see it within the spending data and whatnot. But in terms of spending stuff, yeah, I just think you got to get the big things right. And then at that point, like almost all of your excess cash is going to be going into income producing assets. And that's where it's more about diversification. How do you invest? Timing, market timing, all those types of things will impact your wealth far more than your spending will at that point.
Well, and I think we've learned and had some misconceptions over the years about how money impacts happiness and how it impacts unhappiness. Do you mind sharing some of the studies that you recap and some of your own personal reflections that you put on it?
Yeah, so I'm guessing most of your listeners have heard of the original paper, which was the Kahneman-Deaton paper, which is basically like, hey, after $75,000 a year, you're not going to see more happiness. Well, a guy named Matthew Killingsworth came out, put out his own paper, which is like, no, I analyzed his own data set and he said, no, like happiness keeps increasing as I keep going up the income spectrum. And so obviously there's a conflict who's right. So Killingsworth sat down with Kahneman and they went through all the data and they basically figured out that the original paper, the $75,000 paper, it wasn't measuring happiness dropping off as income went up. It said that higher income cannot prevent unhappiness. I know that's weird. It's like a double negative, but basically the point is you can't stop misery. No matter how much income you have, you can't prevent yourself from being unhappy. And so Killingsworth's paper found actually, no, if you're happy already, more income is probably going to make you happier. And they also found the same thing with wealth. It's actually a little bit stronger with wealth than with income. So to summarize all the results after they went back and forth, they dug through the data, he put out a few more papers. The long and short of it is if you're happy, more money will make you happier. If you're poor, more money will likely make you happier. But if you aren't happy and you aren't poor, more money's not going to do a thing, right? So those people that are like, hey, let's say you're not poor. Let's assume you're kind of out of level 1 at least. And you're like, hey, is money going to make me happy? If you're asking that question, the answer is no. Because as long as you're not poor and you're kind of out of that first stage, it's very likely that there's something else that is causing that. Because if you're happy and you get more money, you're going to be even happier. So if you're happy, you're probably not even asking the question, will money make me happier? Which is kind of an ironic, there's some irony to that.
I love the idea, the thinking through all of that. To bring us nearer to a close, you've now written 2 well-researched, data-backed finance books. My first question behind that is like, what did you learn in writing The Wealth Ladder that you didn't necessarily know or maybe even haven't fully appreciated when you wrote Just Keep Buying?
Yeah, there were 2 things. First, when I wrote Just Keep Buying, I was trying to kind of say, like, what's the best advice I could give to someone if I don't know anything about them? And so that was like I had this mantra and I said, okay, it's about investing, increasing your income producing assets, and that's how you build wealth. And that is a generally good answer for like people in level 2, 3, and even somewhat into level 4, right? But then I realized there were certain people that are like, well, if I want to get super rich, this isn't going to work. And I was like, yeah, that's correct. Like buying the S&P 500 is just not going to get you to level 5, right? And then there were certain people also who, look, Nick, I'm in debt. I can't even think about investments. I can't even think about a taxable brokerage account. You're throwing all these words at me. This is not even in my purview. And so I was like, hey, I'm being a little too narrowly focused, and with the wealth ladder, I had to zoom out. So there's a lot more to it. And so I said, hey, your strategy needs to change over time. That's the big idea that came from this. And the other thing was, I talked about this in Just Keep Buying about the importance of raising your income and how income's correlated with savings rate, et cetera. But now once I got this data set and I really dug through it and then did it by wealth level, it was even clearer to me. And I think there was something there that just made it stick even more. And I'm even more convinced of that point than I was beforehand. And I was already very convinced of it, but now it's like, I'm like, guys, like you can't look, I mean, on page 25, I have this table which has all the median household income by wealth level. And it's like, what the heck? Like, you're telling me people in level 4 are making $200K a year and then people in level 5 are making over $700K a year. And it's like, yeah, the income just keeps going up in each wealth level. You don't have people with a lot of wealth and low income or with a lot of income and low wealth. One of these things has to move eventually, right? And so they usually converge at some point.
I love that you're in the part of the book promotion process where you know what table is on what page.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I remember what that was like. And so I know where you're at. And so let me close out with kind of another writing-centric question for those who are fans of your work. I mean, your background is in data science, but your writing really does feel deeply human. How do you strike that balance between those hard numbers and the softer side of money?
So for me, I think the thing to keep in mind is just like the importance of story. And like Morgan Housel taught me that, like best story wins. And so I really try to focus on that. And I really say, hey, what can I do to tell a great story? Because at the end of the day, like, Peter, I'm not going to be able to teach you that much about money. Like, you study money, you teach people about money. I can't teach you that. Maybe I'll surprise you with a little idea here or there, but how am I going to get you to like the book? I have to put in cool stories that you won't know, that won't be about investing or finance. Like, I'm not going to be able to teach Morgan Housel about money. The same thing, right? So once I realized that, like, hey, how do I get the money people to actually like my book? It's not because of the money itself. It's because of all the other stuff. And so that's the key. The people that don't know as much about personal finance, they'll learn about that, and that's great. But for all the people that do know about personal finance, I need to keep them interested as well. And so it's striking that balance. And so I think right now in the world of AI writing and everything, it's very easy to just be like, oh yeah, like let the AI think for me, let it do that. But at the end of the day, you have to come up with a differentiated perspective. Otherwise, there's no point. Even in my blog now, I'm like, if I'm writing a blog post that's just informational, it's a waste of time, because I know someone is just going to use a chat bot or something to ask a question, and it's going to give probably 80% as good of an answer as I would give, right? But unless I have a differentiated opinion that an AI would never come up with, then that's the only value I add. And once again, that's what makes us human, is because we can think differently. We can say, hey, actually, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the standard advice about lifestyle creep. And that's why I came up with the 0.01% rule, etc.
You make a great point about the AI, and listeners, like loyal listeners of this show and viewers of this show, are going to know that I must be pretty excited about the book because of what I'm about to say. But the fact that you've given us a different lens to look through for personal finance decisions, for whether it's investing, spending, thinking about money in your life, AI lacks that creativity. And I'm not going to rule out that one day it could get there. But you've introduced something to the world that I think AI will mimic and that other people will mimic. And I assure you that if I do a second edition of Making Money Simple, there's going to be Nick Maggiulli's 0.01% rule in there. Nick, thank you so much for sharing your time today. If you're watching us on Cheddar, there'll be a link to order Nick's book in the show notes at thelongterminvestor.com. Nick, where can people, in case they don't make it to thelongterminvestor.com, where can they follow along to get all your good work?
Yeah, my blog's at ofdollarsandData.com. You can click the newsletter, sign up there, and you'll get my feed every week. And then you can also find me on Twitter, Dollars and Data, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Nick Maggiulli. So just find my name. And I answer every DM. So send me a DM. I was hoping maybe it might take me a week or so with the book launch and everything, but I answer every DM. So please reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.
Definitely do it. Guys, follow along with Nick. And if you're watching us on Cheddar, be sure to subscribe to The Long-Term Investor. If you're already listening to us on the podcast or on YouTube, like, subscribe, do all those things that help other people find the great information that we're getting from guests like Nick. Nick, thanks again for joining me.
Thanks again, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Long-Term Investor podcast. To access free financial resources and submit questions to be answered on the show, visit thelongterminvestor.com. Peter Lazaroff is an employee of PlanCorp and BrightPlan. All opinions expressed by Peter and any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of PlanCorp or BrightPlan. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of PlanCorp and BrightPlan may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.